June 1940. In 6 weeks, Europe's strongest army ceases to exist. France, the empire that bled to stop Germany in the Great War, collapses like paper before the Blitzkrieg. Entire divisions vanish. Commanders surrender faster than messages can reach headquarters. On the beaches of Dunkirk, 500,000 men scramble for escape as German artillery turns the channel into fire. When the smoke clears, only silence remains. The silence of a nation that has stopped breathing. In Paris, the conqueror's flags rise over the Arc de Triomphe. The same streets that once celebrated victory in 1918 now echo with the boots of occupation. Behind shuttered windows, Parisians stare as Marshal Pétain's trembling voice fills the airwaves. We must stop fighting. For the first time in modern history, France bows its head to a foreign power. But among the millions listening in stunned disbelief, a few cannot accept the sound of surrender. Beneath the ashes of pride, something begins to stir. Not hope, not yet, but anger. In Lyon, a young teacher folds away a map of France and whispers to her students that wars do not end with words. In Lille, a railwayman burns stacks of German propaganda leaflets in his furnace, the flames reflecting in his eyes like quiet rebellion. In Marseille, a group of journalists debate whether to print the truth or survive another day. They are small acts, invisible in the grand collapse, but they carry something defiant. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain braces for invasion. The Battle of France is lost, and the Luftwaffe now turns its eyes toward London. Air raid sirens wail each night as searchlights sweep the skies. In the cellars and subways of the capital, civilians huddle in the dark. Yet above the noise of bombs and radio static, one voice rises, Winston Churchill, delivering words that echo far beyond Britain's shores. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender. Those words travel across the Channel like a flare in the night. In occupied France, people risk imprisonment to tune their radios to the BBC. For the first time since the fall, they hear someone refuse despair. To many, it sounds like madness. To others, salvation. The idea that Britain will continue the fight, even alone, plants a dangerous seed in the hearts of the defeated. Whispers begin in cafes, schoolrooms, and train depots. If Britain stands, why can't we? It is not a call to arms yet, only a question, fragile but alive. But questions once asked can never be unasked. Across a conquered nation, amid fear, hunger, and censorship, this single thought begins to ripple quietly through the silence. By the end of that summer, France appears still on the surface, obedient, occupied, broken. Yet beneath that calm, the first invisible pulse of defiance begins to beat. It has no name yet, no leader, no organization, only conviction. The silence will not last forever. The story of France's awakening will begin not with armies, but with words whispered in the dark. Words that will soon find their voice. June 18, 1940. In a small BBC studio on Portland Place, London, a tall, thin man with a sharp profile adjusts his headphones and leans toward a microphone. He is Charles de Gaulle, a brigadier general unknown to most of his own countrymen. His uniform is creased from travel, his expression taut with exhaustion and resolve. France has surrendered. He has fled to London, refusing to accept defeat. Now he prepares to speak not as a commander, but as a voice for a nation that no longer exists. When he begins, his words are steady, almost formal. France has lost a battle, but not the war. The sound travels across the Channel through static and darkness, reaching a land buried in fear. Perhaps only a few hundred French citizens hear it that night. Fishermen on the coast, soldiers in hiding, families crouched beside forbidden radios. Yet that brief transmission, carried on thin air, becomes the first heartbeat of free France. The power of de Gaulle's appeal is not in numbers but in audacity. He speaks as though France still fights, as though surrender is a rumor rather than reality. He calls on soldiers, engineers, sailors, and workers to join him in exile, to continue the struggle alongside Britain. It is an impossible demand, but an intoxicating one. Within days, the first volunteers arrive at 4 Carlton Gardens, the headquarters of Free France. They are a few hundred men, soldiers from Chad, sailors who escaped by trawler, airmen who refused capture. They have no nation, no supplies, and no guarantee of survival. Yet in their defiance, France continues to breathe. Inside France, the message spreads like contraband. Teachers copy it by hand on scraps of paper. Priests hide its words inside prayer books. Farmers whisper it at dawn before German patrols pass by. The act of listening itself becomes rebellion. Vichy officials ban British broadcasts. But every night people tune in to the BBC's French service anyway, waiting for the phrase that begins each broadcast. Ici Londres. Les Français parlent au français. Here is London. The French are speaking to the French. Each transmission is a thread of light through occupation's darkness. The BBC announces coded messages, strange phrases that make sense only to those in the know. Jean has left. The apples are ripe. To most listeners, they sound absurd. To others, they are orders, instructions for sabotage, for coordination, for hope. De Gaulle's speeches follow, solemn but determined, promising that France's honor has not died. Meanwhile, in Vichy, Pétain consolidates power. His government pledges cooperation with the Reich. French police begin rounding up refugees and dissidents. Propaganda posters declare Germany invincible, and collaboration the path to safety. But even among Pétain's followers, cracks appear. Some officers despise their own orders. Some bureaucrats quietly aid the underground. The contrast between London's defiance and Vichy's submission becomes unbearable. For millions of French citizens, de Gaulle's voice becomes more than a broadcast. It becomes conscience itself. A memory of dignity transmitted through static. In villages, people risk arrest just to repeat his words. By 1941, small groups inspired by that unseen leader begin to organize. They have no radios, no weapons, no clear plan, only faith. But faith, once awakened, is hard to silence. The man who spoke from exile becomes the echo of a nation that refuses extinction. Each night, his fragile signal crosses enemy airwaves like a whispered oath. It is not yet a revolution, but the beginning of one. The moment when a conquered people realize they can still choose to believe. It began quietly. A whisper passed from one trusted friend to another, a leaflet tucked under a café cup, a poem scribbled on the wall of a train station. In the ruins of defeat, words became weapons. In Paris, a civil servant named Jean Moulin refused to sign a German order accusing French soldiers of atrocities. For that defiance, he was beaten unconscious and left for dead. When he recovered, he realized silence would no longer save anyone. In Toulouse, a handful of students began printing a newspaper they called Combat. Its name both a warning and a vow. Across Lyon, Lille, and Grenoble, similar groups emerged with names that sounded like prayers: Libération, Franc-Tireur, Musée de l'Homme. In the beginning, resistance was not organization but instinct, the refusal to let defeat define them. They were teachers, farmers, priests, and students, bound not by politics but by conscience. Their first acts were small, distributing pamphlets, smuggling information to London through the Pyrenees, forging documents to save Jewish families. Every act was punishable by death. German posters appeared on street corners with the faces of captured terrorists crossed in red. The Gestapo called them criminals. The people began to call them patriots. As 1941 unfolded, the occupation grew harsher. German officers demanded quotas of labor and grain. Curfews shortened. Resistance fighters hid in forests and mountain passes, forming Maquis bands that lived on meager supplies and boundless conviction. Their names, Maquis du Vercors, Maquis des Glières, would one day become legendary, but in these early years they were hunted shadows. Meanwhile, in London, Churchill gave life to a different kind of army. The Special Operations Executive, or SOE, was created with a single instruction: set Europe ablaze. British instructors trained agents in sabotage, espionage, and coded communication. They learned how to blow a bridge with plastic explosives, how to forge papers, how to disappear. By 1941, the first agents began slipping into France aboard small aircraft painted black. They carried radios, false identities, and hope. The contact between London and the French underground transformed defiance into a movement. Messages tapped in Morse code linked Parisian cellars to English safehouses. A single phrase broadcast from the BBC, "The sun will shine tomorrow," could signal a sabotage operation on an entire rail network. Every act of rebellion was amplified by coordination, every success answered by brutal reprisals. Yet for each leader captured, two more emerged. By late 1942, the resistance had grown from isolated sparks into a network pulsing with energy. Secret presses produced thousands of copies of underground papers like Combat and Liberation. They exposed Nazi propaganda, shared coded information, and most dangerously told the truth. A country that had been silenced rediscovered its voice through typewriter keys and whispered passwords. That year, Jean Moulin, now a hunted man, met with de Gaulle in London. His mission? To unite the divided groups of the resistance under one banner. He returned to France under a false name, moving from city to city carrying orders sewn into his coat lining. His vision was dangerous but essential. One France, one voice, one purpose. The Gestapo's reprisals grew savage. Public hangings, mass arrests, deportations, yet the resistance spread faster than fear. Each act of cruelty deepened defiance. Each martyr strengthened resolve. Beneath the heel of occupation, France's heart began to beat again, irregular, wounded, but alive. What started as whispers now carried the rhythm of a nation preparing to rise. Every piece of history we uncover brings the past a little closer. If you'd like to keep exploring these hidden moments with us, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Your support keeps these stories alive. While France lay subdued, Britain stood alone, small, defiant, and seemingly doomed. By August 1940, the Luftwaffe began its great assault. Adlerangriff, the Eagle attack. Across the skies of southern England, the Battle of Britain raged for 4 relentless months. From airfields at Biggin Hill, Tangmere, and Hornchurch, young pilots scrambled into Spitfires and Hurricanes to meet the incoming waves. Dogfights blazed above the Channel, vapor trails etching white scars across the blue. Below, London endured. The Blitz, entire streets reduced to rubble, the glow of fires visible from 40 miles away. Each night Churchill spoke to his people, calm, unflinching, iron-willed. His words were both shield and sword. We shall never surrender. For Britain, these were not speeches. They were survival. For the French who secretly listened, in their shuttered apartments they were something more, proof that courage could still exist in a world gone mad. To many in occupied France, Britain's defiance was a mirror held up to their own shame. In attics and barns, resistors replayed the broadcasts over and over. If this island can fight the Reich, they whispered, then perhaps we can fight too. The Channel, once a barrier, became a bridge, a symbolic line between submission and resistance. In 1941, Free French forces began to gather in Britain and the colonies. Soldiers from Chad, pilots from North Africa, sailors from Dakar, they came from every corner of the collapsing empire. They trained in the cold rain of Scotland, flew in the Royal Air Force, and marched under a new emblem, the Cross of Lorraine. They fought not for conquest, but for redemption, for the idea that France could still stand with honor. Meanwhile, inside occupied France, Britain's example fueled quiet determination. Networks like Combat, Franc-Tireur, and Franc-Tireurs et Partisans began coordinating with British intelligence. The SOE provided arms, funds, and guidance, transforming scattered rebels into organized cells. Coded messages from London signaled when to strike, when to hide, when to hope. The German authorities, confident in their dominance, underestimated the power of example. Britain's survival, even at ruinous cost, undermined Nazi propaganda. If the Reich was invincible, why did England still fight? If tyranny was inevitable, why did its bombs fall short? For every Frenchman who collaborated, another began to doubt. In cafes under occupation, the radio became sacred. People risked arrest to listen to the BBC at night, curtains drawn tight. They heard Churchill's graveled defiance, reports of RAF victories, and the faint assurance that France had not been forgotten. The phrase "Les Français parlent au Français" became more than a broadcast. It was communion across silence. By 1942, that defiance had become contagious. The underground press quoted British speeches verbatim. Resistance members carried clippings of Churchill's words as talismans. The island's courage was no longer distant. It was shared. Britain's war was one of survival, France's one of redemption. But the two were bound together by faith, faith that tyranny could be outlasted, that courage could exist without victory. As bombs fell on London and curfews tightened in Paris, two nations, separated by sea but joined by spirit, endured the same night, waiting for dawn. In a farmhouse attic outside Limoges, a young man crouches beside a radio set the size of a suitcase. The air is heavy with candle smoke and fear. His trembling fingers tap a sequence into the Morse key. Short, short, long, the rhythm of defiance. Each message is a risk. German direction finders can triangulate his position within minutes. But he continues, whispering across static to London. These transmissions, fragile and fleeting, are the arteries of a hidden war. By 1942, the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, has transformed Britain's wartime strategy. Ordered by Churchill to set Europe ablaze, the organization recruits and trains hundreds of secret agents for missions across occupied territory. In the French section, known as F Section, Colonel Maurice Buckmaster coordinates dozens of networks under code names like Prosper, Cart, and Autogiro. From quiet English villages and remote airfields, Lysander aircraft, small, silent, and unmarked, fly over the channel to drop agents and supplies into moonlit meadows marked by lanterns. Those who land are not soldiers but civilians, linguists, wireless operators, couriers, and saboteurs, men and women chosen for courage more than rank. Among them are names that will become immortal: Violette Szabó, a Franco-British courier barely 23, Noor Inayat Khan, the daughter of an Indian Sufi fluent in French and deadly with a transmitter, and Jean Moulin, the unifier of the French resistance. Each carries false papers, cyanide pills, and the knowledge that capture means torture and death. Their missions blur the line between espionage and martyrdom. They organize arms drops, coordinate sabotage of railways, and transmit vital intelligence back to Britain. Every bridge destroyed, every factory explosion is the work of invisible hands. London listens to their reports, coded bursts of Morse describing German troop movements, fuel depots, radar installations. These fragments of intelligence feed the Allied war machine, shaping bombing targets and invasion plans. But with success comes exposure. The Gestapo learns fast. By 1943, the Abwehr has infiltrated several networks. The Prosper circuit, once among the strongest, collapses under betrayal. Dozens are arrested in Paris and Lyon. Many never return. Jean Moulin is captured near Caluire after a meeting with fellow leaders. He is tortured by Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, but never reveals a name. His silence becomes legend. The same year, Noor Inayat Khan is betrayed in Paris. Interrogated for months, she endures beatings and solitary confinement. Even when chained, she attempts escape, twice. Executed at Dachau in 1944, her last word is liberté. Violette Szabó meets a similar fate. Captured near Limoges after a firefight with German troops, she is sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Her courage under torture becomes part of resistance mythology. Yet despite these losses, the message never stops. New radios appear as quickly as the old ones are destroyed. Each operator knows they might be the last link, yet they keep sending. The Germans jam frequencies, raid attics, execute entire families. But the code still hums through the air, fragments of hope, flickers of light. For the men and women of the resistance, communication is not just about strategy, it is survival. Each contact with London proves they are not alone, that the world beyond the barbed wire still listens. In the static, they hear something greater than words, proof that France still breathes. By late 1943, as Allied bombers fill the skies over Europe, these invisible signals become the pulse of liberation. Each coded phrase, "The roses will bloom, the apples are ripe," signals an operation that will one day ignite across an entire continent. Beneath the occupation's shadow, the whispers of radios in attics and barns form a single sound, the heartbeat of a nation preparing to rise. June 6, 1944. The night before dawn is restless, alive with wind and tension. From the southern ports of England, an armada unlike any in history surges toward France. Over 5,000 ships, 150,000 men, carrying the weight of freedom across a stormy sea. Operation Overlord has begun. For 4 years, France has endured silence, secrecy, and despair. Now at last, the resistance hears the signal it has waited for. The long sobs of the violins of autumn. It comes through the BBC, a coded phrase buried in poetry. Across the countryside, listeners freeze. They know what it means. The invasion has begun. In the forests of Limousin, Maquis fighters prepare ambushes. In Brittany, saboteurs cut power lines and tear up railway tracks to paralyze German reinforcements. In Normandy, resistance cells guide paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines, leading them through hedgerows toward objectives. Each act of sabotage magnifies the chaos facing the occupiers. What was once a whispering underground becomes a roaring, coordinated force. On the beaches, Allied troops land under fire. The 1st and 29th U.S. Infantry Division storm Omaha Beach through smoke and surf. British and Canadian units fight at Sword, Juno, and Gold. Overhead, Spitfires and Typhoons strafe enemy positions. Among them fly French pilots, exiles who once fled defeat, now returning to strike their homeland's oppressors. As the days unfold, towns and villages erupt in revolt. Resistance fighters seize crossroads, block convoys, and sabotage bridges. Communication between German garrisons breaks down. In the south, the Maquis du Vercors declares itself free territory, raising the tricolor once more. Though brutally crushed, its defiance echoes across the country. In Paris, tension builds to breaking point. On August 19th, railway workers and policemen strike. Barricades rise again in the same streets where revolution once lived. German tanks patrol boulevards, but the uprising spreads faster than they can contain it. The cry, "Vive la France libre," rings through the narrow lanes of Montmartre. Then, on August 25th, the Allied vanguard, the 2nd Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc, enters the city. These men have fought from the deserts of Chad to the gates of Paris, carrying the Cross of Lorraine on their tanks. They are joined by American units, their flags entwined in victory. The German commander, General von Koltitz, disobeys Hitler's order to destroy the capital and surrenders. The city is free. For the resistance, liberation is not triumph but vindication. 4 years earlier, they had risked their lives for a promise, that Britain's endurance was not in vain, that freedom could return. Now the sound of church bells fills the air, drowning out the memory of jackboots. People embrace in the streets, tears mingling with laughter. Flags unfurl from windows long hidden. The Marseillaise is sung not as ritual, but as resurrection. Yet amid celebration, the scars remain. Thousands are dead, cities ruined, families broken. Liberation carries not only joy, but reckoning. But for one luminous moment, all of France breathes again. From the beaches of Normandy to the alleys of Paris, the same truth resounds. The light has returned. August 1944. The tricolor flies once again above Paris. Crowds fill the boulevards singing, crying, throwing flowers toward soldiers who, for them, have arrived like ghosts returned from the dead. The church bells ring without warning, a sound banned for 4 long years. But beneath the euphoria, the air trembles with something darker. Liberation has come, but peace has not. The guns have barely fallen silent when the reckoning begins. France is free, but fractured. Everywhere, questions rise like smoke. Who resisted? Who collaborated? Who merely survived? The answers are tangled and bitter. Across cities and villages, makeshift tribunals appear overnight. Some justice is legal, much of it not. Women accused of collaboration, real or imagined, are dragged into public squares, their heads shaved, their clothes torn, their faces smeared with tar. Crowds cheer, venting 4 years of rage and humiliation. Others watch in silence, uneasy. Retribution feels righteous, but it is also raw. In official halls, the purge takes another form. The épuration légale, the legal purge, begins. Thousands of former Vichy officials are arrested. A few are executed after trial. Pierre Laval, Pétain's prime minister, faces judgment before a tribunal. The old marshal himself, once revered as France's savior, now stands condemned as its betrayer. His sentence is death, later commuted to life imprisonment. His fall mirrors that of a nation reclaiming its conscience. In Paris, Charles de Gaulle strides into the Hôtel de Ville, surrounded by cheering crowds. His tall frame and grave bearing project the authority of the Republic reborn. Paris liberated by her people with the help of France's armies, he declares, insisting that France liberated itself, that its dignity was never truly lost. It is both truth and myth. The resistance had fought bravely, but it was the Allied armies that crushed the occupier. Still, de Gaulle understands that nations need stories as much as victories. France must believe it saved itself, or it will never rise whole again. Yet within the resistance, unity proves fragile. The networks that once shared danger now clash over power. The Franc-Tireur et partisans, many of them communists, demand political recognition. Gaullists seek central control. Regional commanders bristle against orders from Paris. What had been a moral army now risks becoming a political battlefield. The underground war that once united conscience now fragments under the weight of peace. Across the Channel, Britain's SOE agents pack up their files, burn their codes, and return home. In the pubs and living rooms of London, they speak softly of what they witnessed, of couriers who vanished, of priests who smuggled pilots, of farmers who paid with their lives for a single transmission. They know that history will not remember most of the names. The medals will go to generals, the speeches to politicians. The war they fought was invisible, and so too will be much of its legacy. But for those who lived through it, the memory is indelible. They remember the fear, the hunger, the constant weight of watching. They remember friends taken in the night. And they remember, above all, the quiet strength of ordinary people who refused to bow. When the occupation ended, they emerged into daylight. Not triumphant, but vindicated. France now faces the painful work of rebuilding, not just its cities, but its soul. There will be monuments, books, films, and ceremonies. Yet behind every flag, behind every anthem, lingers the memory of moral choice. The moment when each person had to decide whether to obey, to submit, or to resist. That is the true legacy of liberation, not victory but the rediscovery of conscience. Years pass. The war recedes into memory, its veterans growing old, its ruins rebuilt. But in the archives of the BBC, among reels of tape and dust, a technician threads a spool into a player. Static fills the room, followed by a voice, faint, cracked, yet resolute. France has lost a battle, but not the war. The broadcast is dated June 18, 1940. For a long moment, the room is silent except for the sound of history breathing. That fragile recording captures more than sound. It preserves the exact moment when despair was defied. In 1940, when the world expected surrender, Britain stood alone. Its cities burned, its soldiers were scattered, its future uncertain. Yet the island refused to kneel. That refusal carried across the Channel like an invisible bridge. For millions of French men and women listening in secret, the signal from London was more than news. It was proof that courage still existed. The French resistance did not begin with guns or explosives. It began with faith. Faith that defeat could be temporary, that honor could survive exile, that conscience could outlast fear. Britain's endurance made that faith tangible. It told the conquered that resistance was not madness but duty. It gave words to what many already felt but could not name. From that seed grew the networks that bled and fought. The couriers, the forgers, the farmers who hid pilots, the radio operators who tapped messages through static. They were not heroes when they began. They became heroes by refusing silence. Their war was not for conquest or revenge, but for the restoration of dignity. When liberation finally came, they melted back into anonymity. Some returned to classrooms, others to fields, others to graves without names. Yet the echo of what they did remains. Every generation that studies that time confronts the same question. When everything seems lost, what do you stand for? The legacy of that defiance shaped not only post-war France, but all of Europe. Out of resistance came unity. Out of suffering came solidarity. The European ideal, flawed, fragile, and still contested, was born from the belief that nations could stand together rather than apart. It was the same belief that had crossed the airwaves in 1940, from London to Lyon, from one act of faith to another. Today, historians debate strategies, commanders, and outcomes. But beneath the analysis lies something simpler, the moral heartbeat that kept the lights of civilization alive when darkness seemed complete. The French resistance, inspired in part by Britain's refusal to yield, proved that even without weapons, a nation's soul could fight back. And so the voice on that old recording endures. It speaks not to soldiers or statesmen, but to anyone facing the moment when surrender seems easy and defiance feels impossible. It reminds the world that sometimes victory is measured not in territory, but in the decision to stand firm when standing seems futile. When Britain refused to surrender after Dunkirk, the French listened. When France rose again, the world listened in turn. History remembers victories, but what endures are the echoes. the unseen moments when ordinary people chose courage over despair, and in doing so, kept humanity alive. If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.